if you already have some sort of business skill set, whether that's accounting or finance or marketing, any sort of business vertical, and you want to get that data science skill set on the side, you need to know how to get data, clean it, analyze it, visualize it. And then you can throw in some machine learning, very basic machine learning that's useful to just about everybody. So once you have that foundation of like, hey, I can do base Python, I know a little bit about machine learning, then you can start specializing.
Josh Ebner is the founder and chief data scientist at SharpSight, a data science training and consulting firm. With 2 decades of experience at top companies like Apple and Bank of America, Josh is a true pioneer in data science. At SharpSight, he's harnessing the power of analytics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence to revolutionize customer retention, boost conversions, and drive sales. Get ready for an insightful conversation packed with expertise and innovation. Hey Josh, welcome to the Flow Podcast.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing great. Yourself?
Doing very well.
I would love to start our conversation today by first going through the fundamentals. What is data science and what do data scientists do in a business setting?
So data science, I think, is just using data in order to either inform decisions or to make certain predictions in some sort of systemic way. So in a business setting, we would use data to, we would analyze large amounts of data, try and figure out what the patterns are for some specific purpose, some sort of specific question, and then try and understand how we can improve business processes. So in a marketing context, that might mean improving customer conversions, customer retention. In something like sales, it's, hey, how can we get more sales? So you can use data science, obviously, in a business context, but it's much broader than that. I think for you and I, it's probably a little bit more important for the business context. So maybe I'll leave it there.
Is there a particular tool or software that data scientists use in particular that other functions of a business may not, to kind of gather all that data?
So I think there's a couple of things here. The first is you need to have the data. If you're a data scientist, you need to have the data usually available in some way. Now, in the very simplest cases, it might be a CSV file, some sort of Excel file that you export to a CSV, delimited file. We don't really do that very much in a business setting. There are some businesses that do that. But in many cases, if you're working for a really big corporation, they're going to have an entire team that builds out a database first. So you're going to have usually we would call that more like a data engineering team that's going to build the databases, and then you're going to pull the data from the database. So in terms of the tools, we're going to use SQL. SQL is one of the most important tools that we have as data scientists. That's also sometimes called SQL, Structured Query Language. And that's a tool, a programming language for extracting data from a database in a very structured way. And then once you have that data, then you can start doing some processing on it. So if you're at a very large company, that data usually already exists. You may get some data from other sources like CSV files or like some external files, but in many cases, it's going to be a database. In terms of the other software that we're going to use, today, the modern toolkit is really Python. So most large companies, Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, lots of other tech companies that people have heard of, products that you guys have used. If they have a data science team, and all those large companies do, they're going to use, for the most part, they're going to use Python. They will also use SQL. It's a huge part of the job, is just extracting the data from the databases. But once you have it, you're going to use Python and then some very specific packages within Python to process that data. So we're going to use NumPy for processing the numeric data. NumPy, it's like numeric Python it's an acronym. Pandas is for more like row and column data. So as opposed to strictly numeric data, Python can also have categorical data, but it also can contain numbers. So you can think of a Python, we would call a Python data frame is the main data structure that we would be using in Python data science. It's a row and column data structure that has numbers and strings, text, things like that. And you can think of it sort of like an Excel spreadsheet, but in Python, something like that, where it's just rows and columns. So that's NumPy and Pandas, mostly for data processing and data cleaning. And then you're going to have some sort of data visualization tool to visualize that data and turn it into charts and graphs, which is how you not only identify insights. You hear companies often talk about this. We're looking for insights from our data. One of the ways that you identify that is just visually, and you use a data visualization package. There's a few of those in Python. Matplotlib is sort of a classic one. I don't like Matplotlib all that much. It is very clumsy and sort of old-fashioned in how it works. There's a newer one called Seaborn, which I recommend. And then there's also a newer one that I love called Seaborn Objects, which is only a couple of years old. It's like a Seaborn subpackage, and it's really wonderful. So Python is probably the big one. There's also another programming language called R. I personally love the R data science stack, but it's maybe a little bit less popular and a little bit less used. And there's some advantages and disadvantages to using Python versus R, which we may or may not want to actually get into.
As you were describing the different tools that you guys use in data science, I was trying to bring that back to the accounting and finance department of a company. How does that apply to someone working in those divisions? So I think it sounds like SQL. What would be the most advantageous tool to learn? Would it be SQL or Python mostly for someone working in finance?
If you're working in a big finance department, so when I was at Apple, I sat close to a couple of finance guys, and they were all interested in learning SQL. None of them knew it. They were all Excel, masters, or, very competent with Excel, but they didn't know SQL, and they were all very interested. So from what I had gathered from them, SQL would have been very useful. My suspicion is that it is going to, in fact, be SQL. And then I would still recommend Python. In my mind, if you're a finance person and you're using Excel to clean your data and then visualize your data, you're probably leaving some insights on the table. And if you can learn SQL to pull the data from a database, assuming you're at a large organization that has them. So to be clear, smaller companies, if you've only got 10 people or 15 people in your company, you're probably not going to have databases. You probably won't have a data engineering team that's going to manage all of your data and clean it and stuff like that. There are some ways that you can get that data out of other tools and applications like QuickBooks and things like that. But SQL, I think, would still be very useful. But I would recommend, so I can't say there's only one, because if you only have SQL, there's a lot of stuff that you can't do in SQL. So it's sort of like this two or three things that you really need. You need to be able to extract the data from a database or a CSV file or wherever else it's at. Then you need to be able to clean it up. Then you need to be able to analyze it and visualize it, which is going to be, the visualization. Again, it's going to be something like Seaborn, and the analysis is going to be some combination of Pandas and Seaborn together. And you need to know how to use those things together. So I can't recommend only one. I have to say that it's going to be probably a few things together. But if you can get those things and you have a finance background, you'll be a beast.
You mentioned 3 steps: data extraction, data cleaning, and data visualization, right?
Yeah.
For someone who is very advanced in Excel but doesn't know any SQL or Python, and they are interested in acquiring these skills, how long do you think it could take someone with a finance background to learn programming languages and be able to use it at a proficient level?
It really depends. I've seen some people start and, it takes them years. So the bad news is that for some people, it takes years if you don't really know how to study. If you don't know how to study and practice, it can be very challenging. Now, I've been teaching data science and some of these skills for a while. And if you use the right practice methods, you need to practice. It's sort of like learning a foreign language. If you just open up a textbook and you read the textbook, you're not going to get very far. You need to
Hmm.
actually speak the language. You need to learn how the words are pronounced. You need to memorize some core vocabulary that can be very helpful if you, for example, in language learning, people talk about memorizing the top, let's say 1,000 words. That gives you a huge boost if you're trying to learn French. And it's the very same thing in data science. If you can memorize, let's say, the top 20 to 50 functions in pandas and Seaborn and NumPy, you can actually do that very, very quickly. And there's some techniques that you can use, like spaced repetition and some other things that can help you memorize those functions. And if you do that right, I've been able to train people how to use some of these tools within, 4 weeks. It's possible to learn all of them. NumPy, Pandas, Seaborn, uh, 4 to 8 weeks, depends on how much you study. If you're only practicing for 20, 30 minutes a day, it might take 8 weeks. I had one student of mine, he had just left some sort of school program. He hadn't started his new job yet, and he had some downtime, and he was practicing like 3 hours a day. He did it in like 3 weeks. I mean, he literally learned everything that he needed to know to be like a level one data scientist. He learned that in 3 weeks. So it is possible. It's just that you need to be very, very good at learning.
I feel like these days the sense of urgency to acquire new skills is very important, right? Especially with the
Yeah.
advent of AI and all those changes that are coming down the pipeline. People who really are willing to upskill and reskill, this is the best time. And for accounting and finance professionals, learning SQL, Python, and you mentioned R as well could be really good tools for the profession to
Yeah.
continue in that development. Here's a quote that I would love to get your thoughts on. I wrote a LinkedIn post about, and the title was, Will Accountants Become Data Scientists by 2030? It struck a chord. It went viral. And it was based on a quote from the senior director at Gartner. And this is what he said. It's from Mark McDonald. 10 years from now, finance and accounting professionals will have a totally different set of skills than the experienced professional of today, and will largely look more like data scientists and systems engineers, end quote. So I would love to get your thoughts on that. Do you agree with that? Do you see the profession going in that direction? Yes, no, why? We just would love to get your thoughts.
Yeah. So I think that's really spot on. To me, when I look at finance and accounting, now to be clear, I came up through data science in marketing. So I was more like a marketing data science professional, and I didn't know a lot about accounting and finance. Now, currently, I own my own business. I've owned my own business for quite some time, and I studied some of the other things related, things that you need to run a business. So things like accounting and finance. And the more that I learned, I'm like, these finance guys they got to start doing more data visualization. You've got to, like, the number of things when I've seen, for example, I look at income statements or income statements over time, and you look at a few of those, and I'm like, there's like 10 different things that you could visualize here to make this information much easier to consume. And then once you
Mm.
start computing some other metrics or some other financial metrics, I think to be able to compute those and then put them in the dashboard and visualize some things, maybe do some analysis, you could probably use some machine learning techniques. I think that there's a huge opportunity if you're, especially on the finance side. It is highly numeric, it's highly number driven. It is metric driven. When I think about finance, I literally have on my desktop, on my computer desktop, I have the image of like a fighter plane cockpit. And it's all these dials and numbers and metrics and things like that. And I think when you're running a business, that's a lot of what it is. You have to be able to look at, okay, what's our revenue? What is our cash? How much cash do we have in the bank? How much free cash flow are we generating? How much are we predicting we're going to have, let's say 3 months from now? How much debt do we have? All these different ratios that you might have. And those are the metrics that you're using to fly this plane, to fly your business, right?
Hmm.
And to be able to have, let's say, a dashboard that does that, where you don't have to go, I think I'm sure there are reasons why financial statements look the way that they do, and they are standardized and everyone has to use them. And there are, to my knowledge, some regulatory requirements around that, especially if you are a publicly traded company. But I don't think that's the best way to show that data. So to be able to take some of that, if you have a data science skill set and you can visualize it, and let's say you can start calculating some of those, the metrics, the ratios, the forecast, and things like that, you can have those maybe in a dashboard. I think that's very powerful. So I think, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question exactly, but I think um, data science and finance in particular, maybe a little bit less on the accounting and particularly the bookkeeping, maybe not as much, but on the finance side, to be able to analyze some of that finance data and then use those insights to run your business better or run the business that you're working for better, it seems like an absolute perfect fit. So I'm inclined to say I don't know why more people aren't doing it right now. Because I've seen tons of people on the marketing side and some of the operations and product side. Data science is hugely popular, marketing and product, but I haven't seen it quite as much on the finance side. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
But first, that's a great explanation as to why there's value in data science within finance. And I think a reason why it hasn't been as prominent as in other departments or industries is because there's so many tools that come out of the box that help with visualization of data. But that requires, it's out of the box. You can't really maneuver. You can't really customize things that much unless you dive into learning programming like Python, like we discussed. So
Yeah.
there's value in knowing having those skills to be able to further customize visualizations. And there was a study a while ago. I think it said something like about the brain consumes images 60,000 times faster than words,
Yes.
or something along those lines. So visualization is a very powerful way to digest information, especially financial data, because it's just pure numbers. We need to make sense of that. And one aspect of it is using data visualization tools and techniques. So you're definitely spot on that.
Yeah. There's a really great quote by a famous data visualization guy, probably the guy that got me interested in the beginning. His name is Nathan Yao. So kind of close to yours.
Yeah.
And he said the mark of a good visualization is how fast you can read it. And
Mm,
so one of these things with data visualization, I will say there is that technical side. How do you write the code to create the visualization? How do you wrangle the data so you can visualize it in the first place? But there is a lot of design to it as well. And you're designing for the human brain. So when you're creating a data visualization, you're designing for the human brain so that you can just understand immediately. So the viewer can see the insight immediately. And that does also take some skill. There's some learning you need to do around color and contrast and shape and size and all these other things. There's a lot of data visualizations for better or worse. Well, for worse. There's a lot of bad visualization out there. But if a person can learn how to visualize data really well, you can communicate very large amounts of information to the viewer in a very short amount of time. And it becomes a very efficient way of informing stakeholders who can then make better decisions.
absolutely. And the visualization piece can almost become a specialization within different
Yeah.
departments because it's such an important skill to have. In accounting and finance, that gets tucked into the overall data analytics type of role, which includes visualization of data. You mentioned that you were working at Apple before. So, what motivated you to transition from roles at these major companies to found your own company, Sharp Insights?
Yeah. So when I was at Apple, I worked at Apple, I worked at a couple of other companies, and I liked doing it, but I could see even 10 years ago that data science was going to be huge. And I think it's going to continue to grow in scale and importance. So that was one thing, is just that I saw that it was going to grow and I saw an opportunity there. The other thing is that I wanted to be able, as a data scientist. So I'll say that working for a company has some advantages and disadvantages, and then being an entrepreneur also has advantages and disadvantages. For me, the advantages of being an entrepreneur were substantial. It has given me a lot more freedom. I can sort of design what my day looks like. I work when I want to work. If I want to take some time off, I can do that. Now, the reality is that as an entrepreneur, I actually work probably more than I did certainly more than I did at Bank of America. We worked hard, probably about 50 hours, 45 hours a week. Apple, I was working more like 55 to 60. There were some 70 or 80-hour weeks when I was at Apple. Um, I pretty consistently work, 60 to 70 hours a week. I work every single day, but I've been working remotely for 10 years now. I can work from wherever I want. And it brings me a lot of satisfaction to be able to do that. I also, I know some people, I'm friends with another entrepreneur who, when I talked to him probably about 2 months ago, I had just met him and I said, "Hey, how you doing?" And it was a call like this. It was a group meeting. And he said, "Oh, yeah, I'm in Rome right now. I'm running my business, but I'm going to be in Rome for a month. And then I'm going to Spain for a month. And then I'm going back to Michigan for the summer." And I was like, how cool is that? So it's really great to be an entrepreneur. It gives you some freedom. I like that. And as I've gotten into it, for me, for better or worse, I'm a bit of a nerd. So I've been able to really get into some of the business stuff and learn, the finance and the accounting and the law and some of the other things. And it's been very fascinating to me. So it's just sort of a way of keeping my mind stimulated as opposed to focusing on only one thing. But as I said, it has advantages and disadvantages. And being a full time employee is much more stable, much easier to do in a lot of ways. And if you are a finance professional or an accounting professional or a data scientist or some mix of those things, you can still do very, very well. And in many cases, in the short term, you're going to do a lot better than someone starting a business. So, I don't want to glorify entrepreneurship too much.
What services do Sharp Insights offer?
So at my company, I have a set of courses that train people how to do Python data science that includes all the packages that we've talked about. And as as I mentioned earlier, I developed a training system that can teach people how to do these things very, very quickly. So I can skill people up very rapidly. Aside from that, I've moved quite a bit more into the consulting space, moving more from the more B2C into the B2B side. And now I'm helping businesses do things like survey analyses, building out machine learning systems, and doing also just more like high level data strategy stuff.
Very, very interesting, Josh. Now, let's say I'm a CFO for a big corporation and I would like my team, accounting and finance teams, to upskill in data science. You mentioned you have trainings on your website that you can help professionals upskill quickly. How long are your courses? How fast could a CFO expect their team to be upskilled in these areas by taking your courses?
Yeah. So most of the courses, let's take, for example, my flagship course, Python Data Mastery, which it includes all the trainings for base Python. So all the like logic and if statements and things like that, sort of basic Python stuff. And then it also includes materials for NumPy and pandas and data visualization, and then how to do data analysis with those things. And then also a little bit of machine learning on top of that. That course that's probably about 15 or 20 hours worth of material all in. There's a lot there. You probably don't need to go through every single thing, but if you want to learn the material really quickly, you need to do the practice exercises. So, as I said before, it's like learning a foreign language or it's like
Mhm.
learning a musical instrument. You need to sit down and practice. If you're going to learn guitar, you need to drill scales, you need to drill chords and chord changes and things like that. It's very similar with learning data science. You have to practice. And if you do practice, using the methodology that I've used or that I've developed, you can learn data science, let's say 30 minutes a day. It's going to take you, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. So it really does depend though on the discipline of the student. If
Sure.
you're a person that's like, oh yeah, I'm going to do it. And then you practice once a week and then it's once a month. I mean, it's not going to happen. So you have to be a sort of disciplined person. So if you're a CFO, what you need to be thinking about is, okay, how do I incentivize my people to actually do those practice exercises? and get the result. So if they can develop some sort of training incentives, they can get their people skilled up very quickly.
The interest, though, to learn these skills is really high at the moment. So I think
Yeah,
just people want to learn this stuff just to stay competitive in the job marketplace, especially with AI, just Copilot, and so much going on in that area. That accounting
yeah,
and finance professionals want to gain more skills and broaden their skills beyond just finance. So Python has come up quite a bit lately as one of the skills that accounting and finance pros need to learn. And so 6 to 8 weeks sounds very enticing, Josh, because when I
yeah,
think about the CMA exam, for example, to pass the exams, it's a two-part exam. It takes about a year minimum to study for both parts. For the
yeah,
CPA, it can take even longer. So 6 to 8 weeks to learn data science, a highly valued skill, and it will be even more valuable as time goes by. It's definitely
yeah.
very enticing. So CFOs out there, if you want to upskill your team, definitely check out Josh's courses. We'll link them all in the show notes because I think this is such a fast way to upskill the entire department in a very succinct way. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
In terms of machine learning, what have you seen in terms of machine learning implementation across corporate America?
So, as I said before, my background comes from marketing. So, I was a marketing data science guy for a long time. I also did some more like sales and service customer experience analytics when I was at Apple. What I've seen, there's at least two major things. The first one is using machine learning for analysis. So, you can use machine learning techniques to analyze data, not necessarily to make predictions, just trying to figure out what's driving good outcomes versus bad outcomes. So you can use, for example, decision trees or regression as a more like an analytical technique to understand your customers. You can also use machine learning for prediction. For example, when I worked for a couple of companies, we built predictive models to predict people that were going to respond to a marketing campaign. And if you did that, if there was some substantial cost to sending some sort of marketing message, these were not emails for the most part; they were snail mail, and there was a
Mm-hmm.
cost. So what we were trying to do is figure out who's most likely to respond, so we could spend our marketing money on people that were going to respond. And in order to do that, you needed to identify the people that were most likely to respond. So you could build a marketing model, a response model to identify those likely responders, and it would enable you to get better ROI on your marketing spend. So I've seen stuff like that. You can do very similar things for customer churn, identifying people that are going to churn, and then taking some sort of intervention to maybe prevent that from happening. And that's a little bit more on the predictive side where you're trying to predict churn or not churn, something like that.
That's such an interesting use case for using generative AI. I'm wondering if are these is this accessible to small businesses, or do you think it's not quite there yet? And usually, companies with big bank accounts are able to implement such strategies.
Yeah, I think in the past, it's really been large organizations. So Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, they've been using machine learning for, you know, much longer than 10 years at this point. Companies that I worked for, big banks, we were using machine learning 20 years ago, but you needed a big budget. I think one thing, and we might talk about this a little bit more, but one thing about AI is that it's going to make it more available. Companies that don't have databases, you'll be able to hire somebody that can build a database, and it might be 20 or 30% faster, which means that it might be 20 or 30% less expensive. And I think going forward, those numbers might even get better. So I think one thing that AI does is it makes tech workers more productive, which is probably going to put some price pressure on prices for building out some of this technology infrastructure. And then you'll be able to do the machine learning, build the models, things like that. So I think that AI is actually going to make things more available. The tools and techniques that were only available, let's say 20 years ago, 10 years ago to the big corporations will soon be available to small and medium-sized businesses.
And that's something that we're seeing now, even with just OpenAI's ChatGPT. The models, the newer models, can process so much more, and their API costs keep dropping. So I think we're going to continue to see that trend as more computing capacity is available. A big issue right now is energy. How are we going to power all these data centers? But that's a much bigger conversation for the government in this case, I think, to kind of help the industry, because we will need more energy in that sense. In terms of implementing machine learning, what are common challenges that you've seen, and how do you propose that can be overcome?
So a lot of the things with machine learning, you're going to run into overfitting. That's one of the big ones. And
Sorry, John, what is
yeah,
overfitting?
yeah, very good question. So when you're building a model, what you're doing is you're teaching a model to find a pattern or to be able to do a particular task. And the way that you do that is you give it some training data. You give it data from the past where you say, okay, here were the inputs, and then here were the outputs. Try and figure out the relationship between the inputs and the outputs. But what it sometimes does is you can think of it like memorizing the pattern from that training data, such that it does very well on the training data. But then when you give it new data, new inputs in production, those new inputs might be a little bit different, and it starts to struggle and it performs less well. So that's overfitting. An analogy that you can use is with human learning. Let's say you're studying for a math test and you study 3 practice problems and you drill them over and over again until you are perfect. You can answer those 3 questions perfectly. Then you go into an exam and it has 20 questions, and they're new questions. They're not the same ones that you practiced on. And maybe they're a little bit different. Maybe there's a couple of different details or features. Maybe there's a couple questions that are a little more tricky. They're related, they're on the same topic, but they're different. If you only practiced on 3 questions and memorized those, then you go in and get this new input, these new things that you need to solve. You're probably not going to perform very well. Machine learning systems are very much the same. If you give them, for example, too little data, or data that is, you give them too few practice questions, so to speak, or if you memorize them too closely without really understanding the high level conceptual information, machine learning systems are sort of like that as well. You can start getting these overfitting problems. And you can solve that you can get a lot more data. You can use some techniques that we call regularization, which is, I can't really explain that in a very short time period, but regularization, we have techniques that we would call ridge regression and lasso and dropout and some other regularization techniques. And what they're doing is it's taking that memorization where you're very closely fit to the training data. Let's say you've got a data point up here and a data point up here, and you're sort of like fitting a line that hits all of those points exactly. It's like memorizing the data points. Regularization does is it sort of flattens everything and squishes it down a little bit. So instead of hitting those data points, one up here and one down here, instead of hitting those points exactly, it's actually going to draw a line that's a little smoother and a little more in the middle, and it's not memorizing anymore, not quite as much. So that's regularization. Variety of other tools that you can use to manage overfitting. This is a core machine learning problem and somewhat difficult to solve at scale.
Let's say companies want to implement generative AI, but one thing that you pointed out that is an issue is the amount of data available. Some companies may not have enough data to train a model. So what are your thoughts about using synthetic data to add more to their big database?
So I have to be clear about this. I don't use a ton of synthetic data. Having said that, I'm a little bit skeptical. I know that you can use synthetic data or certain types of synthesized data. You can use they call it like perturbed inputs, where you'll take an input and then an existing input. Let's say you're training a vision model where you're training it with image data, and you'll take that image and maybe you'll flip it upside down. So you'll use the original in the
Mm-hmm.
training data, but then you'll also use an upside down version, or you'll use a version where it's turned to the side, or they might change the saturation a little bit in the image. So they'll take an original image and then they'll modify it in a couple of different ways and then add those modified images to the image training data. Something very similar can happen with certain other types of machine learning. I will say in a business setting, if you're building a marketing model, I mean, I'm not saying that it's never been done. I'm just saying that I've never done it. And it's not something that's really talked about a lot. So I think that the synthetic data, I will also say though that for the large AI models, they are using some synthetic data for, let's say, large language models and some of those things, the new generative AI systems. Um, but for more nuts and bolts, um, predictive modeling, it's again, it's not something that I've seen done, at least not personally.
I'm wondering if this is one of the reasons why OpenAI made their latest GPT 4.0 Omni free for everybody. That's their most powerful model. In the previous one, they were charging $20, right? But now it's completely free with some limits, but it's still free and it's their most powerful model. I'm wondering if they're doing that because they just ran out of data. So to gather more data, they need more users. So why not make it free? They get all the data they need to continue training their models. I wonder if we're going to reach a point where there's just no more data to feed the large language models. What do you think?
Yeah, this is so. I want to be clear. I know a fair amount about large language models, but I'm not on the bleeding edge like some of these guys at OpenAI. Having said that, my take is that I'm pretty skeptical at this point. You know, I think that, everyone's talking about the exponential curve. It just keeps going up and it's exponential. There's nothing that keeps growing exponentially forever. Most things that look exponential in the short term are actually S curves and they'll level off. I don't think I'll do it back here, but it's like it goes up and then it levels off.
Mm-hmm.
So most things in the real world are like S curves. And I think that one of the major things that's going to level off that exponential is going to be the training data. We are simply going to run out of new training data. And I think that one of the big things that's going to happen is, the process of running more experiments and paying for those experiments to get more data out of reality is going to be one of the things that helps models improve over time. So I think that my understanding is that we are sort of quickly running out of training data. They've, a lot of these models have already trained on everything on the internet and then some. And now there's not a lot of new stuff. So I think that that's going to maybe slow down the development of some of these new models. But hey, I could be wrong. It's all moving very fast and everything is changing very quickly.
Yeah, I think people are getting caught up on, but this time is different, right?
Yeah.
They expect this exponential growth to continue endlessly because it's AI. But if
Yep.
history shows patterns, the S curve is definitely there. So why would it be different with AI? But we'll see. It's all
Yep.
speculation at this point, but it'll be interesting to continue to see how this all develops in the next 2 to 5 years. Speaking of that, what emerging trends in data science and AI excite you the most? And how will they transform the business landscape from your perspective?
I think one of the things that excites me the most, I think, everyone's excited about AI. I'm also very excited about AI. But I think that what we're going to see is that data is going to become, as we just talked about, even more important over the next few years. I don't think that it's going to slow down. I think that we are going to, I've been talking about this literally for years. I wrote something on my blog probably about 7 years ago about how we're going to, add sensors to just about everything. And I think that's in the long run what's going to happen. Are you wearing an Apple Watch right now?
No, I'm not, but I'm wearing
It's not.
an Aura ring.
Or a ring. Okay. Okay. There
So
you go.
so it tracks. It's a fitness wearable device. So it tracks everything.
There you go. There you go. So, you've got like the Oura Ring and the Apple Watch and 8 Sleep. Are you familiar
Mhm.
with 8 Sleep?
Not familiar now.
It's basically a mattress, and it's got,
Oh, that's right. Yes.
you
Yes,
know what
I
I'm
am.
talking about. So
Yes.
it's got temperature controls, and it can modify the temperature of the bed and things like that. But it
Mhm.
also has some sensors, so it can figure out when you're moving around and maybe when you're awake and when you're not. I think we're going to be adding sensors to just about everything. I think in the long run,
I agree.
and without, you know, I have to set aside some of the privacy concerns, and some people are going to be like, "Man, that's a little bit creepy." But um, I think we're going to end up adding sensors to almost everything, and data is going to become even more important. And being able to use data and analyze data at scale, and then build machine learning systems out of that, I think that it's going to change. I mean, you hear people, especially in Silicon Valley, be like, "Bro, we're going to change the world." But I actually think that this really is going to change everything. I think that machine learning and I think we're going to really change just about everything and make a lot of things a lot more efficient. And we're going to be able to understand ourselves, our lives, our institutions better, and help them run a lot more smoothly. And whether that means more profit, if you're a business, if that means more health and more well-being, I think that's sort of the end game with this, where we start instrumenting everything, we start adding sensors. And, if we become uncomfortable with that, we can also opt out of that in some ways. But I think it's a really exciting time. And if you're a data scientist, I think it's going to be extraordinarily profitable.
I'm 100% agree with what you said, Josh. I think we'll have sensors in everything. I mean, privacy is always a concern, but what's the trade off? It's the convenience, right? I mean, this Aura Ring tracks almost every health vital that I have. It's being stored somewhere in some database, and I'm trusting the company to be a good steward of my data. But because I do want that access, I'm willing to give it up. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? So I
Yeah.
think with a high tech mattress and everything coming down the pipeline, it's just the convenience of having all that information available to us to improve our lives, our health, our well being. At the end of the day, I think that's where everything is headed in that direction. I
Yeah.
dream of the day where they're going to be refrigerators that will track all the food in there, and based on weight and expiration dates and everything, it
Yep.
will know when to order food for me and just ship it directly without me having to touch anything. That would
Yeah.
be a great day.
And what's cool is that, it's going to, now that we have large language models, that's going to integrate with those devices. So it might do it automatically, but if you want, you can probably, there will be a setting. It'll ask you and say, "Hey, Nathan, you're running low. Nathan, you're running low on milk. Do you want me to order milk?" And your AI system is going to ask you if you want to do that, and you'll be able to respond yes, right? You'll be able to click yes on your phone, or you'll be able to say yes. You'll be in your house. It's going to be like Star Trek. Everyone's been saying this for 50 years. I'm waiting for Star Trek. You're going to get Star Trek. Um,
It's going to happen.
it's happening. Um, so I think it's going to be very cool. It's going to be very cool with challenges though. Like I said, like you said, with challenges, we're going to have to figure those things out. But I think that ultimately technology, it almost always provides more benefit than downside.
This I'm starting to think about when companies infuse, and this is happening already, machine learning, large language models, and robotics. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts about that future?
It's something that I'm very interested in. I'll say, I'll add the caveat again where, um, I'm not a robotics expert. But I think that these things I think it's going to move very fast. A lot of the machine learning techniques, things like computer vision, once you have computer vision, once you have a large language model for a human interaction component that can understand natural language, you have the vision system. And if you have the compute and the energy sources, and I think the energy is going to be a big issue, then you can start building robotics. And what some of the experts are saying is that 5 years, 7 years, we're going to start seeing these things at some scale. And one thing that's sort of important, I've been saying this literally for years before um, Tesla had their Optimus robot, before
Hmm.
they were talking about it, I was saying, guys, Tesla is a robotics company masquerading as a car company. Because
Hmm.
what they're doing is they're basically building machines. They have battery packs. They're not using gasoline like a traditional car. They're using battery packs and they're using computer vision. The whole self-driving thing that's machine learning. So they're
Hmm.
using neural networks, and I actually traditional like computer vision is something called a convolutional neural network. They're actually using something different. Um, Elon Musk literally just said like 3 weeks ago, "Oh yeah, we're not using convolutional nets anymore," um, which was surprising to many people. Yeah, Tesla it's a robotics company, and I think we're going to start seeing all that stuff very, very, very soon.
That's a very interesting insight. I never thought of it that way, Josh, but it makes absolute sense. And when I think about, will people adopt this? Will people want this? Have robots in the home. And when Apple just announced that they are integrating GPT 4.0 with Siri, I was like, okay, that's the step in between humans adopting robots, because we went from touch screens on the iPhone, and that's what Apple revolutionized, just the touch screen, interacting with the world through a touch screen. Now they're revolutionizing it again, but with voice. But what's after voice? Vision, the robots, and all that. So I think that's the stepping stone to that future becoming a reality in a very not in a very so distant future. Actually, this can happen in the next 10 years. I would guess, but that's
Yeah,
again speculation. But things are moving really fast.
that's a great insight. I didn't even think about that. The new Apple announcement just a couple of days ago,
Mm-hmm.
and they're integrating AI into all their systems. And I didn't think of it this way, but it's great. It's a stepping stone. You're going to make people a lot more comfortable on their personal devices with some of these AI systems. And then, that's maybe one step towards something more like robotics, where you have many of the same systems, but then in a different form factor. It's a pretty cool idea.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like we're going to be talking to our phones moving forward. Not so much typing, just talking to it. So yeah, like you said, it will in the future will be just a different form of device, but the interaction will be the same. So it won't be
Yeah.
that big of it won't be so far fetched to think that humans will adopt robots in their homes or work or factories or who knows where else.
Yeah,
Fascinating times to be alive, Josh, isn't it?
indeed.
Let me ask you another question. How do you envision the future landscape of AI in business, especially with generative AI advancements? We talked a little bit about it, but anything more specific that you may want to add?
Sure. So with AI, I'm a little bit skeptical in the short term. I'm sort of bullish in the long term. I think that generative AI is going to be very important. In the short term, I think it's maybe a little bit overhyped. I think one of the best things for finance people and data scientists and other professionals is just learning. The thing that I use, let's say ChatGPT, I use it for learning stuff. And I've been able to learn a huge amount of information over the last, year or so working with ChatGPT. I still buy books. I'll maybe get the best book on a particular topic. And if I run into something and I get stuck, let's say I read through a chapter or a couple of pages, and I'm like, I really don't understand this thing. I'll go to ChatGPT and I'll ask it, say, hey, tell me about XYZ. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, what does this one specific word mean? Help me understand this word. And then I'll maybe say, okay, the way that I understand it, that word means XYZ, and this concept means blah, blah, blah. Do I have that right? And ChatGPT will have a conversation with me like a teacher or a tutor. So I think that in the short term, with I'm adding a ton of caveats here, with the caveat um, that it does still hallucinate and it makes some mistakes, you can still use, these LLMs and AI models to learn stuff. And I think as professionals, that will help us upskill a lot faster. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I do think that there are going to be some areas where generative AI is very important. So the first one right off the bat is with customer support. for a couple of the vendors that I use for my business, they have a chat interface as opposed to just a phone call. They have a chat interface or a email support interface. And that's a perfect use case. Obvious. I think it's obvious now. That's a perfect use case for a large language model. You have a text input, it's giving you text outputs, and then they're doing stuff on the back end that may involve humans, but the interface is text based. I think that's going to go towards AI much more substantially, and that's going to happen very soon. I think with marketing, um, if you're doing SEO, you can write articles 2 times faster. If you need stock images, you don't need to go and buy those anymore. You can go and just have generative AI create a stock image for you. And the same thing is going to happen very quickly with video. We actually, a couple of weeks ago, I don't remember the name of the model. There was a Chinese team that came out with a generative video model where you give it a prompt and say, make me a video of a teddy bear flying an airplane made out of marshmallows, and it'll give you a video of whatever you want. And they're very high quality. And then there was something else about 2 months ago that OpenAI created called Sora. And Sora does something very similar, although I don't think that Sora is widely available. I think it's still in some sort of beta release, a very limited release right now. But those sorts of video models are going to become available too. And, if you're creating an ad, if you're creating some sort of marketing where you need images and video, you'll be able to do that. And that decreases the price by what? What would it cost to make a video of a teddy bear flying an airplane, right? It's probably going to be very expensive 2 years ago, 1 year ago. And moving forward, that price is going to drop to zero or pretty darn close, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Couple cents, right? Couple of cents. So we're moving very quickly towards that world where a lot of those things start dropping in price.
Those are very interesting use cases, Josh. Have you heard of Khan Academy by any chance?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So Khan Academy, they launched their Khanmigo, which is an AI tutor for K to 12. And they've been training it with GPT models, and they continue to fine tune it and improve it.
Yeah.
And in my business, CMA Exam Academy, we've been training our own CMA coach tutor. It's a CMA coach AI. But I've been thinking about that because ChatGPT 4.0 is so much more powerful than any previous model from OpenAI. And it can pretty much help you with any topic. So is there really an advantage for a company to develop its own custom AI chatbot for customer support versus just using a GPT-4 API?
So it's not totally clear. I think that one of the big problems with custom applications right now is that you're implicitly making a bet that these companies aren't going to create something that outdoes or that replaces whatever you build. So, you have a lot of these companies, a couple of months ago that were doing like PDF readers. You would input a PDF and then it would, you could start asking questions to the AI system that was trained on the PDF. You were seeing companies build stuff like that. Now I think that's available with ChatGPT. And I think you're going to see more like that, where this is moving so fast. People are building custom applications and then an AI team, one of the foundation models ends up being able to do that. So you're implicitly making a bet that you have a defensible position versus these AI teams, and that the AI teams aren't going to be able to build that into the base model or the base software somehow. So I'm a little bit skeptical right now of building, but I think in the end, for certain types of very narrow applications, it may be useful to train something custom. And I think we're going to figure that question out. I actually don't know the answer right now. I just have enough uncertainty where I don't personally want to build a lot of those things if it's going to take a ton of time and money. If it's going to take only a little bit, then maybe I'll experiment with it and, trying to build something custom. But if it's going to be a huge amount of money and it's like a very big bet, you're this is a very dynamic time, and you may find out that it's not necessary.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a thought that goes through my mind every day. We've
Yep.
invested quite a bit in our CMA Coach AI support chatbot, and yeah, it's highly specialized just for CMA exam topics. So it's
Hmm.
very narrow in scope. So our vision is that it will be able to help learners really understand the content of the exam at a much better rate and without hallucinations compared to a general large language model. At least that's
Yeah.
our assumption, our working assumption. We'll see how it goes over the next few months as people start using it more.
Yeah. And I think that is one special case where if you have something that's very specific and you want it trained on your specific data in a very specific way, such that it um, stops making certain types of mistakes, very narrowly defined mistakes, and does certain other things much better than a foundation model. I think there's a case to do that. I do think that there is a case. It's just that we're not really, I don't think anyone's really sure how it's all going to shake out over the next several years as opposed to the next, 6 months to 12 months. So,
Yep, it's a very good point, Josh. I understand that you're not an accountant or finance professional by trade, but you come from a data science background, machine learning.
yeah.
Now you're a business owner, so you do understand the accounting and finance function to a degree. So I would love to get your thoughts on how should accounting and finance professionals approach generative AI to stay competitive in a future where AI really dominates every industry.
I was thinking about this, a couple of days ago, and I think you could sort of rank order the different business functions in terms of how much they're going to be advantaged by AI. And I think that things like marketing, customer support is going to be maybe at the very top, then marketing. You've got some other things in the middle, operations and some other stuff. In my opinion, finance and accounting are going to be advantaged less by generative AI. Now, you may disagree with me. Do you agree with that? Or are you seeing things where it's like,
I'd love to get your thoughts
okay,
and see where this takes us, and then I'll
okay.
share my thoughts with you.
So a lot of these models, I shouldn't say a lot of them, all of them right now, they're inherently probabilistic. They are not deterministic. So if
Mm.
you're using Excel, you know, 2 years ago, anytime over the last 20, 30 years, and you type in some numbers into a cell, and then you want it to add this other thing and then divide and then compute the mean of some other things, it does all of that and it's deterministic because that's how von Neumann, the traditional computer architecture, and then the software built on top of that, that's what it does. It's deterministic. So it's very good at computing things precisely, accurately, and precisely, right? But these new models, it's a new form of computing that's inherently probabilistic. So you get these hallucinations, you get these mistakes, you get it very confidently telling you that, 2 + 2 = 7, and it's very confident. And then, you tell it, you're like, hey, wait a second, 2 + 2 does not equal 7. That's a mistake. And they'll say, oh, I'm sorry, 2 + 2 = 5. And so I think that there's an inherent issue here with the probabilistic nature of these models. I am hearing some things said that you can add some additional modules to some of these models that can fix some of that and make it better at math. And that some people I know that people are working on this problem. But all
Mhm.
that is to say that I think that right now I'm seeing less opportunity for finance and accounting people unless it's a very specific application that was developed for them that maybe has some generative AI built in. But I'm seeing maybe less use for some of these foundation models and things like that. That's my take currently. I do think it's going to develop over time, you know?
I really liked the way you described it as probabilistic or deterministic. That to me makes absolute sense in terms of the capability of the LLMs as of today. And yeah, for
Yeah.
accounting and finance, there's an art to it, of course, from a finance standpoint. From an
Yeah.
accounting standpoint, is more black and white. Debits,
Yeah.
credits, does it balance? Does it not balance? Right?
Yeah.
From that perspective, I think that LLMs could do a good job. But from a finance standpoint, I'm not quite sure it's there yet. I know that Microsoft is launching their Copilot for finance, to help professionals use AI within Excel and all the Microsoft
Yeah.
Suite tools, but that's still in its infancy. We're not sure how much help it's going to provide within the next 6 months. But obviously, as with any model, it will continue to improve, evolve, and
Yeah.
once it reaches a deterministic level of accuracy, I think that then there's where we'll see big changes within
Yeah.
accounting and finance and how it impacts those particular functions. So that's a really good way to put it. I never thought of it that way, but it makes absolute sense in my head.
I will say very quickly, one thing for finance people is if you're trying to move into this direction, and I think it's a very valuable direction to move into where it's sort of like a finance data science combination, the large language models can help you in terms of your productivity simply by helping you write code. You can use large language models to help you write Python code. You can ask it questions about certain data science and finance concepts. You can use it to sort of brainstorm ideas or help you solve problems if you have a bug in your code. So I will say there, if it's not strictly traditional finance, but it's more this like finance slash data science analytics professional, you can use large language models both as an augmentation tool, but also as we discussed earlier, you can use it as a teacher. And I do think that there is some opportunity there.
Wow. I really like that. Data science, data analytics, finance, all in one role. I see that happening though in the future. I mean, it's
Yeah.
already happening now, but even more prominently down the road for sure. As a last question for you, Josh, today, what key skills should aspiring data scientists focus on for success in business analytics and machine learning?
Yeah. So are you saying business in general or maybe finance and accounting more specifically? What are you most interested in?
Let's start with finance and accounting, and then you can broaden a little bit into just business in general,
Sure.
if you'd like.
So I think that the core things are if you already have some sort of business skill set, whether that's accounting or finance or marketing, any sort of business vertical, and you want to get that data science skill set on the side, you're going to need a couple of things. You need to know how to get data, clean it, analyze it, visualize it, and probably present it as well. And that's part and parcel with the visualization piece, but also sort of packaging that up. So, like we were talking about very early in our conversation, that means you're using Python. That means you need to learn SQL, probably to get the data out of a database, assuming you're working in a large organization that has databases. You need NumPy and Pandas to wrangle and clean up your data. You need Seaborn or some other visualization toolkit to visualize your data. And then you need to learn how to use those things together to analyze. I always talk about data analysis largely as a combination of data wrangling and data visualization. You need to know how to put those things together to quote unquote find insights. So those are the basics. And then you can throw in some machine learning, very basic machine learning that's useful to just about everybody is linear regression and logistic regression. Since we're running up on time, I won't describe the difference between logistic and linear regression, but basically you need to learn how to predict numbers and predict categories. Okay, those two major divisions in machine learning, predicting numeric values or predicting categories like buyer or non-buyer. So those are the things that you need to learn. And if you're in finance and accounting, you're probably going to want to learn some time series forecasting. Now, traditionally, I have not liked doing time series because it's very difficult to do right. It's very niche. If you're going to be good at it, there are some newer techniques over the last few years that have been developed that have made time series forecasting easier and more accurate. And if you're a finance guy, revenue projections, cash flow forecasts, things like that. So I think that time series forecasting can be very useful. And then if you're just more broadly business analytics, to be honest, it's probably going to be a lot of the same stuff. It's going to be getting data, cleaning it, wrangling it into shape, visualizing it, presenting it, maybe making some predictions off of that data, building a response model or a churn model if you're in marketing, stuff like that. With operations, you see people doing inventory forecasts and stuff like that. So it's pretty broad I think that these skills are, once you get that core skill set, then it's really going to depend on what vertical you're in. If you're a marketer, there are going to be some very specialized techniques for marketing attribution, for example, that you're not going to use almost anywhere else. If you're in finance, you're probably going to be doing cash flow forecasting or revenue forecasting. Like I said earlier, a little more niche. So once you have that foundation of like, hey, I can do base Python, I can do the data wrangling and the cleaning, I can do the data visualization, I know a little bit about machine learning, then you can start specializing.
Josh, thank you so much for such an interesting and insightful conversation today. There's so many takeaways. I really appreciate your time. Where can people learn more about you, Josh, what you do? Where can they connect with you best?
So probably the best place to connect with me is on LinkedIn. You can search for me. It is my name, Joshua Ebner. That's JOSHUAEBNER. So Joshua Ebner. So you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter at Josh_Ebner. And then I have a website, SharpSight Labs. That's SharpSightLabs. So sharpsightlabs.com. Yeah, come find me, talk to me. I'm very active on social media. Want to have a conversation, just send me a note.
Perfect. We'll make sure to include all those links in the show notes. And by the way, guys, the content that Josh posts on LinkedIn is superb. I'm always learning something new. If you want to dive into technical knowledge, definitely follow him and connect with him there because he has great content there. Josh, thanks again, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me.